Hello, so we just completed iteration number 10 and we're now ready to start with iteration number 11. In 10, we were able to enable and disable the start game button, as you can see, and we learned about using the is enabled attribute of the, it's actually attribute of UI control, but since UI button is inheriting or extending or building upon the UI control, it has access to the is enabled. Here in this iteration 11, we're going to try to do the same, but instead of just the start game button for all the node buttons. So when the game launches, all the nodes should not be accessible because you have not played any game yet. And only when you, not just even start a game, only when a sound is played and the user is ready to make a selection of which note they heard, that's the only time when those buttons need to be available. This is assuming you follow my design where we give the user one attempt at the answer only. Another variation on this game is you can give the user more than one attempt. In the previous video, I talked about enhancement to let the user click on a play again button so that they can play the note again. Another different enhancement is to allow the user to make more than one choice. And you can say if you get the right answer from the first choice, you get the full score. But if you get the first one incorrect and you get it correct on the second time, maybe you get partial score, and third time, and you can either give them unlimited amount of attempts or you can give them limited number of attempts to get the correct answer before you cut them off. But the design I'm following here, we are giving the user one attempt at the answer, and if they get it wrong, that's it. They hear another tone and or another note. So that's what we need to do. So we will need to start the game with all the buttons disabled. Then once a note is played, then we enable the button. Once the user makes a selection to check answer, we need to disable all the buttons. And yep, that's all. So we disable the button and that will be it. So we need to disable them at the beginning when the whole view starts. So when the view did load, we need to disable them. Then we need to enable them when you play a note, disable them when we check the answer. So let's see how we can implement that. So enable, disable the notes. So now with respect to all the notes, one of the big difference between the notes and the start game is that there are more than one in this iteration. In iteration 10, we had only one button, but in iteration 11, we have 12 of them. So how are we going to handle 12 of them? You may say, well, I'm going to use 12 different lines of instruction like we did in a start game, and will be a problem. Or I will introduce you to how we can create a collection of all those buttons and then use the iteration construct to iterate through those different notes and be able to apply the same instruction to multiple elements at the same time. So 11.1 will be the problem formulation, and we'll say here that scope is very similar to the previous scope, enable and disable the node buttons at the start of the app, after playing a note, and when the user makes a selection. And then how do we test that? We'll do a testing scenario similar to iteration 10, and then we can see that which is actually not similar to iteration 10. You'll just need to play a game and observe the node buttons changing status. in the solution formulation, in the model, we'll need to work with collection of buttons. So we'll use collections of buttons. And then in the view, we will need to connect the each of the node buttons to the same collection and as outlet. And then in the controller, so in the controller, we will need to make a change at different times. So the first time is when the app loads. So this will be in the viewDidLoad function. The second time is when a note is played. So this will be play game. And then in the third time, when the user makes a selection. And this will be in the check answer. So these are the three different events or locations where we need to make a change. So what change do we need to make? A change we need to make is to iterate over the collection of button outlets and change the status, and set the is enabled to true or false, depending on whether you want to enable the button or disable the button. So we'll say, and I'll talk about the iteration when we are in Xcode. The solution implementation will start by set the connect the node buttons as outlets, and I'm going to iterate over the collection of buttons. We'll put that in a function to change buttons. So we'll need to add a function to change the buttons so that we don't iterate over more than one location. What you want to notice when you write software, you want to avoid similar code written in multiple locations. Every time you see similar code being repeated in multiple locations, that should immediately suggest to you a function. And inside the function, you will write those lines of code that you need to be repeated, and then just to call that function. This allows you one location to maintain instead of multiple locations. So we connected the node buttons as outlets, and then implement change buttons function, and then call the function in the different events, the viewDidLoad, play game, and check answer, test, and commit. So let's go ahead and apply that. So the first step is to connect the node buttons to the controller as outlet collection. And we have not done outlet collections before, so this will be the first time we do it. It says one of the options when you connect an outlet, when you connect any component to the controller, there is the option of an outlet, an option of an action, which we have used before, but there was a third one that we haven't used yet, which is outlet collection, and you'll see that now. So if we select one of the node buttons and connect that button, you'll see in the connection type there's outlet, there's action, and then there's outlet collection. An outlet collection is an array of nodes, and the button or the outlet gets connected as an element in that collection. So we can call this node buttons and then connect. See, when you connect it, it is connected as an array, a primitive array of buttons. See, very similar to what we did with the URL, a primitive array of buttons. and then it is not initialized in the controller because it is initialized in the interface build. If you hover over that collection, there's only one member of this collection, so we need to add another member. So we select another node button, press Control and drag. Now do not drag to insert, but drag to connect. So if you extend the line to hover over the definition of the collection, you'll see that you're not inserting, but you're connecting the outlet collection. So now if you hover over it, both buttons are connected. Another way to connect, see when we hover over the black circle next to the outlet, there's a plus sign. So I can drag from that plus to the buttons and make the connection this way. And that might be easier than connecting from the node button to the outlet, but I wanted to show you that both ways can be used to connect and add more elements to the collection. So we'll connect all of it. All right. So now I have a collection that is made of 12 outlets to each of the 12 buttons. So let me go back to the standard editor. And what is next is I need to add the change notes or change button. I need a function that will change the status of or enable or disable the buttons. So I'm going to call it function, and then you give it a name. Every function needs to start with the keyword function. Then it needs a name, so we're going to call it change buttons. And then you can decide if the function needs to receive a value. In our case, the function needs to receive a value actually. The value that the function needs or whether you are changing to enable or to disable. And the key parameter, as we discovered in the start game, whereas our start game is a true or false. If it's false, meaning you're going to disable. If it is true, meaning you will enable. So what I need to create here is one parameter, and I can give it a name. Change, you give it a variable name, and you can give it a title, change button enable, and then you can give it give the function a name, and this name will be I'm running out of choices. Let's say it value, and this will be boolean. So change button to enable or disable, and it needs to receive a value, and that value is type boolean. So this is called a parameter. It's a memory location accessible only to the function, and whoever calls that function will need to pass a value that will be assigned to this memory location. This is like a title for the function or a title for the variable, and you can provide that to distinguish functions from the others. So what do I need to do when I receive a value? In the change buttons, I will need to change the status or the enable status of each member of the node buttons to this value. So if you do it in a similar fashion to what we did the start button, you can access each one of those. You can say node buttons, which is an array, and say I want the first element of that array, which is a button, and say is enabled equal value. So I don't know if it's false or true like I did in the start game, but whatever it is passed in this parameter. So I'm basically setting it to the value in this parameter. And then the 0 is the index. So the array, if you remember, the array is like a spreadsheet of different rows, and each row has an index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can use the square bracket with the index to access each individual element of that array. So I'm accessing here the very first button in the array and setting the is enabled attribute to whatever is passed to that function. If I follow this model, then I need to add 20 more or 11 more of these. So I'll say 1 is enabled equal value, and so on and so forth, and keep writing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But notice that all of these instructions are exactly the same. The only thing that is changing is the index of that instruction. When you see a situation like this where an instruction is being repeated multiple times, that should suggest to you the use of loop or the use of iteration. An iteration is a mechanism that allows you to repeat a single instruction multiple times and have a change. There are different ways to do iterations. For an array like this, the easiest one is called the for loop. So we use the keyword for, and then you will iterate over the array element by element. So we'll need to define an element of the array. So I can call it element. For each element in the array node buttons, for each element in the array node buttons, do the following. So you create a block for the for, and inside that block you write the instruction that you want to be executed on each element in that node buttons. What the for in will do will take the array, grab the first element, assign it to this variable, and then allow you to do any instruction on that variable. Then it goes back, grab the second one, assign it to element, allow you to do whatever, then go to the third one, grab the element, assign it to this variable, and keep doing that until it runs out of elements inside that array. So what do I want to do on this element? I want to set the enabled is enabled function to the value. So I want to set the is enabled property to the value. So that's the change buttons function, and it's using the for loop to iterate over the array elements. And instead of writing this sentence 11 times or 12 times, I wrote it only once, but inside the body of a for loop. So now the next step is, so here this change button is not being used. It's an orphan function. No other function is calling it. So now we need to implement the disabling of the buttons. So we said when the app loads, all the buttons should disable. So what this means is in the viewDidLoad function, I should disable all node buttons. To do that, I don't need to loop anymore. I can just call the change buttons and pass to it the value as false. So I can say change buttons, and then what do I want to enable? No, I don't want to enable, false. When I do that, it will call this function, assign false to this variable, and then iterate through all the elements and set the is enabled to this value. Then when do I want to enable it? I want to enable it if we are going to play random notes. So if we are still playing random notes, we need to enable the button. So I come here inside the true part that says, yes, we are playing random notes, and I can say enable the node buttons. So how do I enable the node buttons? I call the function and say true. Then I need to disable it once you go to check the answer. So once you click on a button and you are ready to check the answer, I need to disable the node buttons. So I say change buttons and disable. So let's try. Come on. So here it is. the game started and the view did load kicked in immediately, changing the button to false, so you cannot click on any of the buttons. Now let's start the game. When you start the game, the start game became disabled. We heard the sound and now the buttons are enabled. Now see what happens once I make a selection. Now all of them are disabled until you hear another sound. You make a selection, all of them are disabled until you hear another sound, and you make a selection, and then you get the end game, and you come back to the status where you have a start game that is ready and the buttons are all disabled. So that completes this this iteration and completes this project. As I mentioned before, there are many additional enhancements that you can do. So some of them is play again, enable the user to hear the sound one more again before making an answer. And this will be accomplished by adding a button. You can add a button here, and that button can become visible only when a note is played, and when you click on the button you play the current note again. Remember, we have the player created as a class variable, the player, so any function can call on the player and say play. So if you say player play, it will play that same note again. The other possibility is to change the text of start game to something like now playing when a game starts. But remember, you have to return it back to start game when the game ends. Another option, which could be a little bit more complex, is to set a timer for the user to make a selection, like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and show a countdown, and and when it hits 0, the buttons are disabled and a new note is played. Then another option would be is to modify the scoring criteria to respond to either 1 or 3. Let me call those enhancement 1, enhancement 2, 3, 4. 5, you can display the stats as bar charts instead of numbers. You can add additional stats. You can modify the game. I don't know what else you can do. You can change colors. You can modify background color from one game to the other. So as the user play another game, perhaps you can change the look and feel by providing a different background color, providing different text color on the buttons, or different background colors on the buttons, and so on, to give the user a different look and feel. You can also add levels. So you can consider the level we have as level 1, and then in level 2 you can distinguish the levels either by more turns, less time available. You can play combination of notes. Instead of a single note, you can, in level 2, maybe play 2 notes and the user need to select 2 notes. Level 3, maybe it's 3 notes and the user select 3 notes, and so on and so forth, or any other ideas that you may want to think of. I hope you enjoyed this module, and then this is, as I mentioned, this is the one of the most involved module in this collection. Has so many different applications, and the experience you gained from here can allow you to create so many different types of apps in the area of games for training and education. Thank you.